Between 2020 and 2022, China's booming property market came to a crashing halt. Complexes turned into ghost towns, residents organized mortgage boycotts, and a pandemic shook the global economy. The unprecedented crisis exposed the economic vulnerabilities of China's real estate sector. One company in particular took center stage.
Evergrande
defaulted on major bond debts.
Evergrande, one of China's largest developers, suffered some of the biggest losses. Its founder, Hui Kayan, was once the second richest person in Asia. Then in 2021, his wealth plunged $17.2 billion. Since 2017, he's lost over 90% of his fortune, and his net worth in 2023 stood at $3 billion. The Post reached out to over 50 social media users in China and spoke with about 10 who refused to be identified out of fear of backlash. They are all homebuyers, trapped paying mortgages on half-finished flats. One had even moved in because they had nowhere else to go. Another, a 30-year-old man, told us that he is spending half his income on paying a mortgage as well as rent on a separate place. He said he tried talking to the developer but eventually stopped getting replies. He and other homeowners began organizing a protest that was halted by people in uniform. More local homeowners started receiving anonymous calls warning them not to escalate their action. One told us that he was detained for 10 hours, and he eventually quit the WeChat group and laid low. It's now been more than a year, but he's no closer to moving into his dream home, which seemed within reach not long ago when the economy appeared to be thriving. So, how did China's housing market go from boom to bust? China has relied on its massive property industry as a main driver of its economy for decades.
China's real estate-related industry is account for about 30% of GDP in China, which is very significant.
Behind the colossal sector is a prevailing housing system called the pre-sale market. It's a system that exists in many countries in the world. It means developers can sell homes before they are fully built. But there are two ways mainland China's market puts homebuyers at unusual risk. We can understand by comparing to a city like Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, homebuyers pay a down payment, but are not required to pay the full amount up front. While in mainland China, the cost of the property is required to be paid in full with a combination of a down payment and bank loans. In Hong Kong, the down payment is supervised by a third party like law firms. But in mainland China, the down payment goes straight to the developer's bank account. With the presale profits, developers can launch a construction project without having to put up sufficient funds of their own. But in the face of a cash crunch, the money increasingly goes toward mandatory spending, like paying workers, leaving homes half-built. In Mandarin, they have become known as lanweilou, meaning rotten-tail buildings. So why are there so many lanweilou? The long-standing issue can be traced back to the beginning of China's market boom. China is a latecomer in urban housing development compared to its global peers. But since the 1990s, China's housing market has been on a fast track. Like any booming market, its demand was created by the people. In China's case, that demand was caused by migration from the rural areas to big cities. The scale of China's urbanization has been unprecedented in human history. The urban population rose 37% between 1990 and 2021. More people moving to cities meant the need for more flats.
过去我们讲这个中国啊，这个宏观经济啊，一个很重要的词叫人多。现在呢，我们可以把它增加一个词叫房多啊，人多房多。
Evergrande founder Hui seized the opportunity early in the urban boom. In 1994, the Chinese government introduced the presale housing system, arguably to satisfy the surge in demand. In 1996, Evergrande was established. just in time for the 1998 housing reform, when Beijing moved away from its socialist housing distribution system to a market-based approach. That paved the way for Evergrande to go from nothing to becoming a Chinese property giant, earning $73 billion in annual revenue at its peak in 2020. According to its website, it currently owns more than 1,300 projects in 280 cities across mainland China. While it is China's largest developer in terms of contracted sales, it's also one of Asia's largest borrowers. Evergrande uses the borrowed money largely on further land purchases and construction projects in hopes of earning future profits from resale. But what happens when prices drop?
我们产生了一个房价只涨不跌的这个好像市场非常狂热整个这个数据呢非常强。这个呢其实某种程度上是不太正常的，就是说不太存在说哪个这个房地产或者说哪个资产它的这个价格这个一直这么强劲。
And that's exactly what happened. Property prices fell in the COVID-19 pandemic. Months after the first COVID cases were detected in Wuhan, China began a crackdown on borrowing with a policy known as 3 red lines. It put a cap on 3 debt ratios of a developer: a liability to asset ratio of less than 70%, a net debt to equity of less than 100%, and a cash to short-term debt ratio of 1. Many of China's developers were not able to fulfill the requirements, overstepping one of the 3 lines. As a result, they lost funding, which increased their financial burden. When COVID cases surged and large cities like Shanghai went into lockdown, housing sales were frozen and prices dropped starting in August 2021. Evergrande went into default later that year, and Chairman Hui stepped down. But who's to blame? Experts say the 3 lines policy could have worked, but was introduced at the wrong time.
I wouldn't blame the 3 red lines. I would just blame the fact that this sector became too big because it was bringing so much growth and employment that nobody wanted to stop it.
We couldn't expect there will be COVID happening in 2020. So that black swan event, nobody could prevent. So that just happened to be all happened together.
Home prices eventually stabilized in January 2023 after Beijing lowered mortgage rates, helped complete some pre-sold housing projects, and subsidized developers' finances. The government even sent signals that it may ease the 3 red lines debt caps. Does that mean China has fixed its housing market? It's clear now China has a lot more to reckon with than just policy.
It's a demand issue. It's not only a regulatory issue, it's a demand issue because China's population is falling. The demand isn't really there. So this is important to understand that the solution cannot only be lifting restrictions because it will not solve the full problem.
For as long as most can remember, China's rising population has been an economic advantage to its labor force. But that number is now dropping fast. The working population went from 997 million in 2014 to 986 million in 2021. The UN predicts it will start declining even more rapidly in the 2030s through the end of the century.
You don't have the newcomers into the housing market. So the demand is weak. First, population is falling. Second, disposable income is not growing, stagnant. Third, the youth is unemployed to a large extent, 20.8%.
What's next for China's housing market?
就是整个这个市场它本身它是确实是要有这个进行调整的。这个背后呢，其实一个真实的一个这个原因，那就是一个供求关系了这个市场需求如果说跟供应这个关系一直朝着这种绷得比较紧的方式去走，一旦市场的这个需求可能速度没有跟上，那么我们这个供给端就会开始出现一些问题。
When China's workforce moved from the countryside to the city in the 1990s, it caused decades-long economic growth and established a housing market that relied on pre-sales to speed up urban expansion. As China's pace of urbanization trends down, demand in the market may have reached a bottleneck.
I think therefore we are expecting by year end, we will see rather stabilization of the price correction. So we will not really see the further drop of the pricing in housing market. And then year 2 and year 3 going forward, we will have a less supply coming up. So that will also help the market stabilization.
It may well signal that China has once again reached a turning point.